It's time to be woke, take off your shades, it helps see through the smoke, cause the wicked hide behind the cloak, and if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked, so listen up, cause this hair of the dog, what's real, what ain't, is this the fog or smog, cause there's a difference when you breathe it in, so don't let the corporate media take you for a spin, this that morning show, they put you in the know, so I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, 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 yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. The dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Monday morning. Last week in March, which is a big deal for Canadians because the weather is warming up. Unfortunately, the unseasonably warm March that we just had seems to be going to be followed by a very cruel April Fool's joke, as they are predicting snow on April. All of the birds and all of the grass is starting to green up, and so if things go the way they are, as they have been lately in our society, it's going to be a cruel month. It's probably going to be cold and it's probably going to be snowy, but at least we had March. Anyways, welcome. We get started off on a new week, and we are continuing our theme of the theme that we've been following for the last few weeks, and spotlighting activism in women around the world, and today is no exception. But that starts with me introducing my lovely and talented co-host, Ms. Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning, Andy. Good morning. Happy Monday to everyone else. And we are in the final few days of International Women's History Month. So, just the final few days. So today's topic, I think, is very timely because the woman that we're honoring just recently passed away, but we're going to talk about her legacy and some of those topics that are extraordinarily near and dear to her heart, lessons that we can learn from as we go through what I hope is going to be an awakening. But for those of you who noticed my new mug, Andy, look what I got.
I'm not looking.
It is the official Hair of the Dog coffee mug. Everything tastes better with a little bit of snark. So good morning.
And a little bit of hair.
Just a little bit, yeah. Mm-hmm. So Andy, I got to take a little victory lap this morning because, well, first, those of you who are tuning in, good morning. Good morning to you on this fine Monday morning. And we are live and interactive. So if you want to jump in and participate in the conversation, tell us where we're wrong, agree with us, whatever it is you want to do. We will see the comments that you put in the chat and we will read them on air. So feel free to jump on in here. But first, a little victory lap, because I think it was last week where we were talking about the fight for 15 and how Joe Manchin had led that fight, how powerful Joe Manchin was to lead that fight of Democrats who were against putting the minimum wage raise into the stimulus bill. So I had said then that all of this was performative. And while we're all directing our ire at Joe Manchin, he's been doing this for years. And I called out what kind of happens behind the scenes. Then it was a theory. Today, I don't think it was a theory at all. So I had originally said that Joe Manchin was likely approached by Schumer, Pelosi, and others, maybe Steny Hoyer, said, hey, look, if you will take the brunt of this and you will kill this for us, then there'll be something in it for you. And at the time I said campaign dollars or the DNC, DCCC will back you on this, whatever it was. Well, yesterday it came out that Joe Manchin's wife, Gayle, is now going to be appointed within the Biden administration. So to me, that is the clearest indication of a quid pro quo in all of this. So Joe Manchin will take the heat for the Dems who didn't want the fight for 15 at all in any way, shape, or form. And here's a little gift to you. We're going to make Gayle Manchin the Appalachian Regional Commission appointment. Yeah. So there's a nice cushy job for you, Gayle.
Yes, yes. And that's important because, well, does it even need, do we even need to talk about it? Like that, it's just so ridiculous, right? If you're a quote unquote Democrat, right? And Joe Manchin is the absolute easiest target to say, look there, see, he's the problem. He's the reason why we can't have nice things, right? And why is that a problem? Well, see, Joe Manchin is a Democrat in a rather Republican leaning state. And so anything that he does that is in line with quote unquote the Republicans really, has a good effect back home where the people that are responsible for electing him. And Joe's been around. What does he care if he pisses off a few progressives in the meantime? It really doesn't affect him, right?
Right. And it's just, this is politics laid bare, right? So when you have people on the left, voices on the left telling us that, oh no, you can't do the fight for 15, you can't do force the vote, they're making deals behind the scenes. Yeah, they are making deals behind the scenes to benefit each other, not necessarily to benefit us. And particularly in the Appalachian area of West Virginia, holy crap, is this not the poorest area ever? And you have all these people who are out of work or have health problems because of the work that they are doing. We're not doing anything for them. So yeah.
But Carrie, they have choices.
Do they? Because I just want to remind everyone, oh, by the way, Joe Manchin had a primary challenger. And she was a badass progressive who was from the area. She was the daughter of coal workers, her entire family coal workers. And she wanted to not only support the industry in the area, small businesses, but the people themselves. And it was the DNC and the DCCC that helped stop her to help Joe Manchin. So there's your deal. There's your sweet, sweet deal that was made. So hopefully she's going to run again. And I reached out to her to see if maybe we can get an interview and test those waters, because she did really well for the first time out. And I'm hoping that she runs again. And everybody who's pissed off at Joe Manchin or DNC right now, remember this. So if we can get Miss Paula on for an interview, maybe we can replace Joe Manchin and Miss Gayle with somebody who's actually going to work for the people.
Yeah, so. And I think that Paula Jean was one of the progressive candidates that was really, really well supported within the progressive side, in much the same way that Jen Perlman or Chid Buttar or that were walking the walk and not taking any money and doing all these things. And we find it's exactly the same thing, that because a lot of Americans are unplugged from what's actually happening, with really no fault of their own, it's all about name recognition, right? And she's gotten her name out there, and we found that when they run the second time, that's when it happens. So, I hope all of the great progressive names, like Lauren Ashcraft and the like, all run the second time, because they're going to have so much more success with the little bit of name recognition that they got. And let's not forget that during the pandemic, the rules changed severely. And most of the ways that these candidates had, for going door to door, was curtailed by the pandemic. So that's a big part of it as well, right? So.
Right, and that really was the strength of the progressive movement, because most progressive candidates don't have money. They don't have the machine apparatus working for them. They have it actually working against them. So those face-to-face conversations, those touches at the door, those really mattered. And under COVID, it just didn't happen. And I know that there were a number of candidates, some of whom used our network and our platform to get their message out. You're still only reaching a tiny portion of your hopeful voters. So yeah, Andy, it really made a difference. But then we see on the opposite side of it, somebody like Marie Newman out of Illinois, who, like you said, she ran twice. First time she did okay, but then she never stopped campaigning. She was always out in the community, always out getting her messages, kind of that soft campaigning in between the cycles. And then when it came time to file and run again, she had that name recognition. People, oh yeah, I spoke to her. Oh, I saw her at this event. And she was, yeah. So it really works.
And at some point, these candidates are going to be able to have, rallies and debates again, like they used to, that they couldn't, which again are more ways that a progressive without a huge bankroll gets their name out there, right? And that's the key. I think that all you have to do is look at the support that Bernie had, at the number of people that showed up for his rallies, right? It was massive, as compared to Biden. We're going to split the room in two, so you 5 people are on one side, So it's if there's any doubt about the support out there, all you need to do is recall, search Bernie on the Google machine, Bernie rallies, and see these massive stadiums filled with people, right? And that was gone. That was another reason why the progressive movement lost steam, and we all, of course, know what happened then.
Oh yeah. Well, which to me, our topic today actually addresses that, because as we go through the life and times of the woman that we're honoring, she keeps talking about how capitalism requires that level of subterfuge and infighting. So it's a little bit of a difficult leap to go from US politics to what she was talking about, but I see it very clearly, because when you have somebody like an AOC, who candidate AOC was just knock your socks off. Congresswoman AOC, not so much. And I've said it before, and I still believe it, when you have candidate AOC saying the things that we all believe in and firing us up, and then she becomes congresswoman and does none of it, that actually hurts the progressive movement and every progressive that comes after, because who will believe that now? You're going to be just like her.
And you and I have had a difference of opinion for a while now about what actually goes on, and that's absolutely fine. But I think that, above all, about personally what you think is happening with the squad or what have you, said clearly the way forward is not necessarily through the electoral process, right? That, and when we've talked about that too, that there are a number of different avenues that progressives have to follow in a concerted effort to make changes, right? And that includes, grassroots movements of progressives, protesting and calling and all of that stuff that happens as well, because we've seen, history shows us, and Bernie said that the change doesn't start at the top, it starts at the bottom, right?
To your point,
right?
To your point, let's look at Nevada, the Democratic Party of Nevada. There was a complete sweep. All those third way Republican light Dems in leadership gone. And now all of those leadership seats are filled with progressives. And I said last week, if you were concerned about the new law in Georgia for voter suppression, you need to not be looking at Republicans because they don't care. You need to be looking at your local county parties and your local county clerks. So yeah, Andy, it's bottom up. And that is how we address it. So real quick, I want to get to Mike. Mike is struggling with the whole Monday thing. Mike, come on.
So there's a possibility that Mike was doing a little day drinking on Sunday.
Maybe. He says, I don't accept your Monday. I reject it in my reality. Well, let's see how that works out for you. Good luck.
Nothing a ibuprofen and a nap won't cure.
Right. That's like calling him blind because I just can't see myself coming to work today. It's not happening.
Absolutely.
So get with it, Mike.
I've misplaced Mike Kane.
Exactly. So let's get into this whole capitalism and the patriarchy. So this is an interesting conversation. And first I want to set the baseline for this. For those of you who don't know what feminism is and keep railing against it, and I always see people who don't understand it, including feminists. Feminism is nothing more than the push for autonomy and personal agency. So you have somebody who is female, identifies as female, and wants to have personal autonomy over what they do for a living, how they do it, who they are, and what choices they get to make for themselves. That's it. That's all feminism is. And if in any way, shape, or form you're feeling threatened by that, that's really you. And you need to take a good look and sit with why that is. Why do you feel like this other person should not have autonomy and agency over who they are and self-determination, and why that might threaten you, right? So it's not on that other person, that's on you. And I think that goes back to the crabs in the barrel, which is all part and parcel to the capitalist model. So this is the conversation we're going to have today. And the woman that we're talking about had, this is Nawal El Saadawi. It doesn't roll, and I'm pronouncing it.
You're doing
poorly.
fine. You're doing fine.
Okay. So what's so funny is I speak some Arabic. Yeah, so I speak it like a white girl, but I
may have to push back on that a little.
Well, I've always gotten a compliment whenever I try to speak a different language, and the native speaker goes, "You speak well because you speak slowly," and I'm like, "That's a polite way of saying you speak like a white girl." So this woman, when in our list of badasses, she passed away at 80 plus years old, and up to the day of her passing, she was still fighting. And this woman was described as she could shake a nation or call for a revolution and terrified everyone simply with her voice. And for me, that entire notion just kind of gave me chills, because I have always believed that the way that we communicate, the written word, all of these things has far more power than people realize. And here we have someone who lived it. She absolutely lived it. And she was born in the 1940s. So you have her entire lifetime as a rebel, a dissenter, starting from the early age of 3. So she was born in Egypt, and under the utmost what we call patriarchy society, right? So she describes her childhood where, going to school, the first time she wrote her name, she wrote her mother's name, right? The matriarchal lineage. And her professor, her teacher at the time, obviously male in the 40s, she's described as being very cruel and made her cross it out. No, you write your father's name, your father and your grandfather. And so that's the patriarchy. And she says at that time, I became radicalized. Like this, my mother taught me everything. She taught me everything. Why is she being rejected? Why is she being erased? And this is part of where naming and communication really, you start to see this spark where she starts to understand why this is so important. And from there on, she goes on to, she's 10 years old, and everyone in the late 40s and early 50s in Egypt, you're married by the time you're 10, or at least betrothed. And all of her cousins and everyone else was in that situation, and she rejected it. She said, no, I don't want to do that. And there's a story where she blacked out her teeth to make herself look less desirable. And what helped her was she had her mother and her father supporting her, because she was so adept at school and all the work that she did. She really applied herself. And she talks about, as in her childhood, having her brother, who was like a year younger than her, doted on and spoiled rotten because he was a boy. And when I heard this story, she's like, I hated my brother for that, because here he was, just a boy, and he wasn't very good at school, and he didn't apply himself, and he's lazy because he didn't have to, but I had to. And all of the rights and privileges that he got simply because of his gender. And I remember going, wait, that was my upbringing too. And it was kind of stark, because here in a westernized society, we look at what happens in the Middle East completely differently than what we would in the US. And maybe that's American exceptionalism or just that Western culture, but we always look at that area as women being suppressed. But then her example of her brother and her, I was like, yeah, that was me, because I always had straight A's. My brother maybe got C's, mostly D's, didn't really have to try. And he was allowed to drive a family car, and he was allowed to go hang out with his friends. I could not. And all of my girlfriends growing up have similar stories, because that's a boy and you're a girl. And it just kind of clicked that everything she's talking about happened to me, happened to the people I know. Why? Why do we think this way? And that is the core of all of her work. So she went on to medical school, and she wrote 50 different books, which are now being translated into English, republished. And she went on a tour just a number of years ago to the UK and other areas where her book was being released in different languages. And that is the core of which she talked about, that this struggle for feminism and liberation is more than just where I'm from in Egypt. She said, this is global. And she was right. She was absolutely right. This is a global struggle. And then what I like is that she put an extra layer on it. She said that feminism is the response to patriarchy, which is a symptom required in the capitalist model. So when she spoke about it, she talked about how men are subjected to this kind of abuse under the patriarchy and don't really realize it, because they also require liberation. They are being oppressed under patriarchy. So she was very adamant about being, I'm not against men. We're not against men. In fact, we want men to come with us in this liberation struggle. And that, I think, is the key point that a lot of feminists, particularly the militant feminists, kind of miss, is that, and this is my own personal opinion, this is why I couldn't watch shows like Oprah, because I always got the sense that there was an antagonism towards men, and I reject that, because if I'm struggling for my own autonomy, I'm not going to suppress someone else, and I need those allies. And that's exactly what she was talking about. So Evie, can you put up the two quotes from her, because there were two works that I think are really important in this. Her first written work, and this is part of where she was getting death threats, and she was imprisoned, and all of these things that happened to her because of some of the works that she did. The first book was Point Zero, And that was, she was very creative. She didn't take the tact of writing a political novel. She wrote a fictional piece about a woman who was a prostitute in Egypt. And so that way she could run the narrative about what was happening to women. Like a woman who is a prostitute cannot be charged with prostitution if she doesn't have somebody participating in the illegal act with her. Right. So she pushed back on all of that, and women being sexualized and their bodies being commodities. Remember that phrase, bodies being commodities, because that is where capitalism comes into all of this. So the two quotes that I picked from her, and there are literally thousands. She's got so much, such a great body of work. But the first quote is, solidarity between between women can be a powerful force of change and can influence future development in ways favorable not only to women but also to men. And Andy, you keep saying it over and over again, all boats rise, right? And this is the progressive movement, that it's not me, it's us, it's all of us. And that was her push for the feminist movement, for the feminist liberation, is what she called it. So, yeah. And that book focused on women in the Arab world. So that was her second book. And then the other one, this is just her specifically. She said, women in most countries have not achieved much because they can't be liberated under the patriarchal, capitalist, imperialist, and military system that determines the way we live now, which is governed by power, not justice, or by false democracy, not real freedom. And that, for me, I think that speaks to the Americanized woman, the Western modern woman. We still don't get equal pay. And we see that, right? And the fight for 15 falls under this category too. Most people will still offer the argument, well, it's teenagers and burger flippers. And the reality is, no, that's not true. Most people who work for minimum wage jobs are parents, mostly women. So when we're talking about the fight for 15, this is part of that liberation struggle. And if women can get $15 an hour, literally it should be 25 now, but if we can get 15 for women, then we're getting 15 for everybody. And that's part of the all votes rise.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that in society, when we talk about, and I think that the word is a little overused, but I think its relevance is very profound. When we talk about different levels of privilege in society, right? We talk about who is the most privileged, and you can see a hierarchical thing depending on other different, like race and sex and ableness and all of these different things that allow people to be somewhere on the ladder of privilege. But I think the important thing about that is that it's human nature to want, if you have an advantage that privilege gives you in society, that you don't want to give that up and you want to keep it the way it is. So, when we look at the white, male, able-bodied, heterosexual person would be the top, on the top rung of the ladder of privilege. Well, it takes quite a bit of understanding where you are, right, and not to deny that, and to look down the ladder and say, well, I want everyone to have the same advantages as myself. So, but I think that a lot of times that goes against human nature, and that's quite a struggle, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have seen it, particularly in this country, from slavery, right? The slavery all the way up, where you have, we call them now Becky with the latte, or the latte liberal. In the early American history, you had white women who were benefiting from a protected status under the patriarchy in terms of slavery, but they themselves were oppressed but comfortable enough that they were, no, okay. So we're going to also help oppress other people in that social structure below us. So this is all part and parcel to the liberation of everyone. And what I love about Narwhal is she pushed back so much on the concept of the white savior, particularly where the Western modern woman believed that they had a good grip on feminism and were going to go and liberate women in other parts of the world, particularly the Middle East. And yeah, she pushed back on that completely. And I'm going to get into that story because I absolutely love it. But rather than me talking about her, I pulled a small clip that I want you to hear the words from her. And there are so many interviews with her. And as you go from her early writings on up to the later years, she says it herself. She's like, some people, when they get older, they lose the edge. She's like, I have become more radicalized and more outspoken the older I got. And part of that was because she demanded her autonomy. This woman was married like 4 times, divorced her husbands, and things that are unheard of in the time that she lived, where she was born and raised and whatever. She demanded her own agency to the point of going to prison and being in exile and all of these things. She was not about to yield. And you could see that throughout her career. So this is an interview that was done by the BBC just a few years ago. And she's just a beautiful individual, in my opinion. So these are her words. Andy, if you wouldn't mind playing that.
Is assistant professor of Arab politics at Georgetown University. As we go back right now to Egypt, joining us on the phone is one of Egypt's most renowned human rights activists, Nawal El Saadawi. A well-known feminist, psychologist, writer, former political prisoner in Egypt. She lived in exile for years due to numerous death threats. Nawal El Saadawi joins us on the line from Cairo. Welcome to Democracy Now! Your feelings today in the midst of this popular rebellion against the Mubarak regime, calling on Mubarak to leave. Do you agree?
We are in the streets every day. People, children, all people, including myself. I am now 80 years of age, suffering of this regime for half a century. And you remember, Mubarak is the continuation of Sadat. And both Sadat and Mubarak, their regime worked against the people, men and women, and they created this gap between the poor and the rich. They brought the so-called business class to govern us. Egypt became an American colony, and we are dominated by the U.S. and Israel. And 80 million people, men and women, have no say in the country. And you see today that people in the streets for 6 days, and they told Mubarak to go. He should have gone if he respects the will of the people. That's democracy. Because what's democracy is to respect the will of the people. The people govern themselves. So we are happy, but what I would like to tell you, the U.S. government with Israel and Saudi Arabia and some other powers outside the country and inside the country, they want to abort this revolution. And they are creating rumors that, there is Egypt is going to be ruined, to be robbed, and they are also preventing. We don't have bread now, and the shops are using this to raise the prices. So they are trying to frighten us. They have 2 strategies to frighten the people. So we say, oh, we need security, we need Mubarak, because people are living in fear. But when I go to the streets, there are no fear, But when I stay at home and listen to the media, I feel what's going to happen. But when I go to the streets, to Midan Tahrir, and see the people, the young people, the old people, the men, I feel secure. And I believe that the revolution succeeded. So they are trying to abort it, the power outside and inside. But we will win. This revolution, the young people who started the revolution and who are continuing to protect it, they are not political, ordinary young men and women. They don't belong to the right or the left or Muslim. There was not a single Islamic religious slogan in the streets. Not one. They were shouting for justice, equality, freedom, and that Mubarak and his regime should go, and we need to change the system and bring people who are honest. Egypt is living corruption, false elections, oppression of women, of young people, unemployment. So the revolution came. It was too late. This revolution is too late. But anyway, it came.
I think, Carrie, it's one thing that we haven't discussed is I don't think people should be, surprised if they, haven't heard of this woman before, because we're talking about an area of the world where, the U.S. has, been complicit in regime change wars. And any activist voice that comes out of that region is obviously going to be suppressed, by the mainstream media. So I don't be surprised if you've not heard of her before, is my point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I was watching this first, I misspoke. I said it was a BBC interview. This is obviously Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman. But you heard her tell the story about what was happening in Tahrir Square at that time where it's been dubbed Arab Spring. And the things she was talking about there as a witness, as a participant in that, I don't recall ever hearing on US media and other outlets, because she was saying that it was not a Muslim uprising. It was not anything other than a populist uprising. And she said herself, there were no religious slogans, no party slogans. This was just people asking for equality. And that was never mentioned in the US media. In fact, she also talks about the narrative that was portrayed. You remember we were hearing here, and maybe you heard it in Canada, Andy, that if we got rid of Mubarak, if this succeeded, this revolution succeeded, then the Muslim Brotherhood would be able to flourish. And she was saying exactly the opposite, that the Muslim Brotherhood was being protected by Mubarak. So that was entirely different. And I think all of this calls back to the imperialist and the capitalism, because you're right. For those who are unfamiliar with the history, you had Anwar Sadat, who was kind of handed the role in, let's just call it what it is, U.S. imperialism. Mm-hmm. And this was somebody who had started the war in 1973 against Israel, and then the U.S. got involved and others, and all of a sudden he flipped the script, right? So he was now going to Jerusalem, and we had the Camp David Accords and all of these sort of things, which in the U.S. we lauded as a positive step. And in many respects it was, but the pushback against him, because he had done so much propaganda and rhetoric against Israel, against the West, all of these sort of things, for him to suddenly flip, what happens? People get pissed off, right? You cannot control the narrative for so long and then do the exact opposite. Now you become a target, which is why he was assassinated. Right. So I put a link in there about his assassination. So Mubarak was his vice president, who, again, you don't have democratic elections, let's be honest. So Mubarak comes into power and he's taking over the same kind of establishment and regime that his predecessor had, which was kind of a US puppet. And she says it there herself, there was a US enclave. And we've seen this many, many times before. Right now in Shanghai, in China, it's a US enclave. Why? Money. When I lived in Hong Kong, US enclave. Why? Money. All of these things were not necessarily militarily strategic, but capitalist strategic placements. And that's what she was describing here. So over and over again, we see these same themes and narratives. So I put some links in the description where you can go and read through what was happening with Egypt at that time. But what I love about her narrative was she was so encouraged because of everything that she had gone through in her lifetime. Now young people, she's surrounded by young people who get it, who see it, who are not necessarily allied to a party, who are not necessarily allied to a religion, not all of these things except to each other. And that is what we have in the US. That's what we have in other parts of the world. So the similarities are just so dramatic to me in what was happening there. And it's still happening because, oh, by the way, it's happening in Iran too. That country that we're supposedly hating and trying to go to war with. The same populist uprising is happening there too, and has been.
But
right?
you'll never hear about it in the US.
No. And
right. Because you can't control a narrative when it's in the public eye.
Which is why part of the reason we're seeing so much on the censorship issue. Because even in the article about the assassin who participated in the assassination of Sadat, he mentioned social media. He's like, look, if we'd have had social media then in 1970, the way we do now, he's like, there would have been no assassination because we would have understood better how to deal with the constructs around us. And like you said, Andy, organize on the ground.
Yep, absolutely.
So,
right. And that's the whole thing. It all comes around, right? What do the capitalists want? They want money and they want control. Wait, what it's that joke that I love to say, what's the difference between a democracy and a dictatorship, right? That a dictatorship is a country that won't allow the U.S. to drill for oil on their soil, and a democracy will.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that excellent narrative. So one of the examples that Nawal shares in several interviews and as well as in her memoirs, this delightful pushback on the white savior, particularly the Western savior. And she describes this conversation that she had in meeting with Gloria Steinem and all of these preeminent figures of what we consider the feminist movement. And she ends up turning the tables on them. She's like, you come into the Middle East saying, oh, how horrible it is, but you don't understand your own oppression. And for Gloria and these other women, they're like aghast. What do you mean? I am liberated. And she's like, I've seen your marriages. I've seen the way your husband talks to you. And I think what I love about her is she always goes one step deeper in her analysis. Like when she did the feminist socialist movement, and she talks about her disagreements, I guess we want to call it, with Marxists, particularly Marxist men, because the Marxist men's group didn't like that women had their own group. Said, no, you need to come over and be Marxist with us. And she had a personal issue with Marx in that she's like, okay, on paper and on principle, it sounds great. But when you look at the man himself who had a child out of wedlock and disrespected his own wife, that's not liberation. And I was like, oh, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So she's like, how well did he believe in any of this if he's willing to do that in his own personal life? That's walking the talk. So I thought that was very telling, particularly for us in the West. And going back to the Gloria Steinem comment, But one of her examples of capitalism and the oppression of people that I think is so very telling, because it's the commoditization of the person. And she says very explicitly, you know, Western women look at the veil, the Muslim veil that women must wear, the hijab, and you look at that as a symbol of our oppression. She's like, that's capitalism. She said, look at the modern Muslim woman who is, they consider themselves caught in the middle. So they'll wear the hijab, but then they'll have a bare midriff. So there's some nakedness in there, is the way she describes it. She said, that's capitalism too. So she describes nakedness and the hijab as two sides of the same coin. And she says, because the hijab is a way for profit to be driven from women. We're going to require that you wear this garment, and that helps the capitalist profit model. Or we require that you have nakedness, and you look at the Western culture or the modern Muslim woman with the bare midriffs, or women all across the world with more nakedness on them. She said, that is also capitalism driving a profit model. So you become the commodity in both of these respects, right? So it's not your personal agency. It's, think of the American woman wearing the American flag bikini. That's capitalism. This is a woman who is wearing a bikini adorned in an American flag that completely violates how that flag by law is meant to be displayed. At the same time, we're talking about America and the symbols and honoring them. Meanwhile, you are taking the code that governs how that flag may be displayed and trashing it. And you're doing it all for a capitalist thing. And she describes it in the same way for men as well. You become a commodity. And I described it before under human resources. The entire field of human resources was drawn from capital management. Your people are capital commodities, and how do you better control them, right? So your HR department, any company you work for, is not there for your benefit in any way, shape, or form. They're there to protect the company from you. That's what they do. That is their job. And that is the commoditization of the person. So when she talks about liberation through the feminist push, you liberate women, you liberate everyone. And that's the core of it. So Mike weighs in. He says, capitalist strategic makes it military strategic because the U.S. military runs on an engine fueled by capitalism. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So so the difference, and Andy, I think we need to do a program on what socialism is, what democratic socialism is, what Marxism is, communism, because I know in this country, we don't get it. We don't understand it. We confuse these things all the time. And when she went for socialism rather than outright Marxism or something else, it was because the way she describes it, it's all of us, right? So there is a role for government.
Sure.
Yeah, role for private industry, role for business and entrepreneurs, but we reset the focus from profit to quality and people.
Sure. And I think that a lot of that has to do with when we take a look back at history and we look at successful iterations of socialism or capitalism to maybe garner a model to look for, to figure out how we want to form our society. We have to remember that, we're looking quite a ways back into our history, right? And really nothing in terms of North American, because it really hasn't been anything even close to socialism in America, despite the socialist instances here and there, like the fire department or whatever, right? So I think that the past models aren't necessarily what's going to be required, in a more just society because of the fact that we now live when we do. And so the Marxist model or any of the past stuff maybe doesn't necessarily translate to a more modern society, right? So this is all a new concept as we look forward, and what form it's going to take, I think, is going to be almost like a trial and error thing to see how it works best in a modern society like ours is now, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And these are the conversations that we need to have, I think, more and more. And I'm encouraged when I see people on social media, particularly getting back to the fight for 15, when we see those old objections trotted out about, well, as a business owner, I'm going to lose money. And people are just organically pushing back saying, well, if you cannot afford to pay your employees a livable wage, you don't deserve to have those employees. And maybe you need to rethink your business model. And that is something that I have believed from early in my career when I was helping business owners become better managers of their business. You can't hire people if you can't afford to hire those people. You need to come up with other things. And this goes back to educating the small business owner, not putting it on the employee. Right.
Well, sure. But I think that conversation also has to include that, excuse me, if you don't have a decent handle on macroeconomics, and then you don't realize that the minute you raise the minimum wage in the United States, you're virtually doubling the salaries of 40% of Americans, right? Whatever it is. Don't quote me on the percentage, but all of those people now have the ability to make double what they did before. So their participation in the economy now has increased. You now have more people that have the ability to go out and purchase more things, right? That have the ability to maybe go out and eat in restaurants. Of course, we're talking about a post-pandemic world right now, but a more robust economy where more people are participating in it raises all boats as in terms of small businesses, right? If you pay society more towards their value in that society, then you automatically will get more customers, right? Mm-hmm. And so we see that doing something positive in the economy only benefits everyone, right? In this, by allowing participation, right? The current business model is we're just going to keep everything at the top, and it doesn't matter that most people in our society can't even purchase the products that we're making. Right?
Well, that goes back to Ford. Ford understood this with his rollout of the Model T, pricing it so low that his employees could afford it. And he says that over and over again, and that is the best business model, right? So, and this is why I know people are so enamored with Tesla, but Tesla is priced itself outside of a consumer market. So it's ironic that it's named after a guy who was an outright socialist and wanted people to have access to electricity and products and things like that. So they've taken that name and bastardized it for a capitalist model to enrich somebody who is anti-union and isn't necessarily paying all of his employees a fair wage. So,
yeah, and who doesn't mind saying on Twitter, yeah, we can invade anybody we want to. We're the U.S.
Right. Yeah, it's a mental health problem at that point. But
capitalists be capitalists.
yeah, they're doing the thing. So I hope that throughout this entire discussion, we were able to illustrate how the fight for 15 is a liberation model. And by feminist liberation, that doesn't exclude men. That is a pushback on capitalism as an imperialist weapon being used to suppress not just women, but men too, because men are taught to be suppressionists. And this is something that Nawal says over and over again. It's not just men, but it's women. It's mothers who are doing it to their daughters and not really realizing it. And the overarching point that she makes throughout all of her work is what we said at the beginning, that capitalism requires slaves to fight amongst themselves and divide themselves. And that is what we keep seeing over and over again. From the DNC and the DCCC suppressing a candidate running against Joe Manchin, all the way up into what we're seeing for the Fight for 15 and forward. So I also included a link here to Yemen. For those who haven't seen it, the UN just came out with a comprehensive report. Mothers are dying at the rate of every 2 minutes. This is a pregnant or a new mom or a mom with kids. That is because of the imperialist movement, Saudi Arabia, US-backed imperialism in Yemen. That country is being decimated. People are starving, moms are dying, kids are dying. There it is. That is your stark example. And if it's still not clear at this point, drop me a line. I'll break it down somewhat slower and maybe simpler for you. But yeah, all of this goes together. So that is largely what I have for this morning. I mean, I can go on. Obviously, this woman had 80 years of activism and pushing back. So there's a lot here. But yeah, we'll save the rest of it for a Wednesday coming up. And just a real quick plug. If you enjoy independent media and if you enjoy the work that we're doing here, not just on Hair of the Dog, but with DLF Live, KC InfoRail, and all the other things that we've got coming up, please consider just $1 a month donation. We do have a $3 Patreon level, but the $1 level is a fuck you to corporate-owned media. And the reason why this works is because we know that corporate-owned media has gone full-on propaganda. Full-on, it has been for quite some time. And when you support independent media, broadcasts like ours, what it actually does is, number one, helps level the playing field. But number two, we become the litmus against which they are measured, and we help push them back towards journalism ethics. So if you want to change the landscape across social media in the world, then this is where it starts. So for just $1, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't take a Starbucks this week, and that's what, $10. So
yes. Or just don't order the caramel drizzle.
Yeah, right. Or give me the extra phone. Then yeah, absolutely, it's reasonable even during this pandemic, even during this time. And this is how we push back and we start to end the propaganda and the narrative. So please consider that. We are at patreon.com, Digital Liberation, or if we're not the one you want to support, please support independent media and put your dollar where it counts. So
that's right. Think of your $1 as one finger.
Yeah, the most outspoken finger. So, all right, Andy, that's all I got. Any final thoughts for this Monday morning?
No, I think we've pretty much taken care of it all. I think that all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Carrie, for another great show. And we will see you on Wednesday. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog, we keeping it G. Whoa.